All right, let's start here. It's all eyes on Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana today. He's set to deliver his medium-term budget policy statement this afternoon. Economists say the economy is likely in a technical recession. So clearly, Godongwana faces tough decisions. We have our team in Parliament ahead of the speech, and we're joined by business anchor and editor Devan Murugan, who is outside Parliament. Devan, of course, Eskom is one of the biggest headaches in terms of state-owned enterprises. And now we're hearing that government could actually take up some of its debt. What's likely to happen there?
Yeah, good afternoon, Masejo. One of a number of factors that Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will go through today when he delivers that medium-term budget around about 2 o'clock this afternoon. And you're quite right. Perhaps the biggest issue being brought up by analysts and commentators ahead of that budget speech is the issue of Eskom. So remember, Eskom is sitting with 400 billion rand worth of debt, and the sense is that the government will take on at least 200 billion rand of that. Now, it sounds shocking to begin with, a huge, enormous amount, but some analysts are saying, look, if that happens, it might introduce a certain degree of certainty to the markets and to just generally to the South African public that perhaps there's some way forward in organizing or paying attention to the state utilities debt. It doesn't stop load shedding, of course, and power cuts, but it may just give that sense of certainty. The question is, Masejo, and we're hoping to speak to the finance minister if that happens post-budget, is what sort of conditions does government put forward to Eskom if it goes ahead and puts that 200 billion rand worth of debt on the balance sheet? Big question. There has to be some sort of return. But we also put that question to Sifiso Buthelezi. He's the chairperson on the Standing Committee of Finance. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about that.
It becomes important to first understand before we even come in to say what has brought them to where they are. That's one. That's very important. Two, before you ask a recapitalization from government, tell us from your side what you have done. Again, in line with the social compact thing. For instance, if you, it's a worrying thing about Transnet. I saw those figures. So it is a worrying thing. But again, as we know, the question of Eskom. The people of South Africa, through Parliament, through budget, have given about 136 billion rand to Eskom. So I think it's the high time people are sort of saying, what are we getting in return? They are investing in Eskom, a very strategic company all over. Whether you look at it socially, look for the kids who are going to be sitting down for their final exams this year. You look at hospitals, but again, you look at the economy, all the things that we are talking about. If Eskom doesn't come to the party, they may end up being illusionary. So it's very important that, again, we should get an update that as we invest, as we recapitalize, as we try and help you, what are you doing from your side?
All right, so Devan, but it doesn't end there. Our state-owned enterprises, as we all know, are in tatters. And now there are talks of Transnet also now needing government to bail them out somehow.
Yeah, and that gives you've painted that picture correctly, because state-owned enterprises, two of the biggest units that are responsible for the economy turning. One is Eskom. You need to fuel power into the grid so that factories, conveyor belts can turn, so that the lights can come on. You don't have that, you've got a problem with the economy. But here's the other issue. If you can't get commodities taken via rail to port so that they can be exported, you've got an issue there. That's where Transnet comes in. That state utility facing a near collapse. You'll remember just days ago when we had that strike, Transnet 2, as you're correctly pointing out, saying that, look, they need money for operations. They just cannot get their balance sheet right, so their hands are out as well. So that's another big issue, again, highlighting the fact that once again we're entering this phase where government has to actually come in, intervene, but at what cost? Well, here's Sifiso Buthelezi once again on the Transnet issue.
The issues coming from Transnet, indeed, I worry. For me, I would like to know how did you get there? before we're then saying how can we help as government through the minister, whatever he presents. If there's something about Transnet, we would like to hear exactly what has happened. How do we find ourselves where we are? So that as we come in then and play our part as government, as parliament, through appropriations, we should be knowing exactly what has happened.
And Devan, of course, we are still a country with many problems, so it's not just going to end there with SOEs, Eskom and Transnet. What else should we be expecting this afternoon from Godongwana?
And I'll tell you what, we're going to bring in the economist from Stellenbosch University, Ntabiseng Moleko, Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko. Doc, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I mean, just to answer that question, you probably overheard me about the issues of Transnet, the issues of Eskom, but there's more to the challenges on this budget than the state-owned utilities, aren't they? I mean, this is really about the state of finances. What have you been looking at ahead of this budget?
Thank you so much for having me. I think, number one, we've got to have a country that is actually working, a country that is on. Manufacturing is suffering, households are suffering, small businesses are suffering, primarily because of the extent of load shedding and how load shedding is hitting at manufacturing productivity and really disabling even those who are trying to get into, remember, post-COVID and lockdown, trying to get back into the economy and into the swing of things. And we're seeing that really hitting hard on and disabling South Africa's economic recovery program at all aspects. We're talking households, aggregate demand, supply side, and the entire value chain of the mainstream of the economy of South Africa is hard hit. So any recovery is actually being taken back a few percentage points, and that's why we're constrained in that 2% average growth rate for this year. We're not expecting the Minister of Finance to actually push us out. Treasury is expecting 2.1. I think most economists are ranged between 1.8 and 2.2. And some are looking at downward revisions, primarily because of some of these issues of energy. I think on the second side that you talk to is what relevance of state-owned enterprises and networked industries play a critical role in not just subsidizing and reducing costs, but in moving goods and services. And I think this puts more of the muscle and the finger on state-owned enterprises and their efficiencies. This comes to the point where it's a non-negotiable to get them working and to get the best of South Africa into these SOEs, get our best into governance structures, into the boards, but also into management structures so that you can reignite these and get them working in efficient cost models, because you cannot sell these. And I think we need them to make our economy start working as it was before, but even better.
You take that sentiment to anyone on the street here this afternoon, they'll ask you, what is the return on that? So we go ahead and take 200 billion rand, put it down on the balance sheet. We go ahead, take a whole lot of money from the coffers, throw it to Transnet, which is the logistics company. What's the return? What's the conditions here?
You're using the word throw it. I don't like the word throw it. I use the word subsidize, incentivize. I use the word make sure that you have a developmental state. I use the word that talks to how do you make sure that it's not profit alone. So if you have a market system embedded in our economy that seeks only to have profit but not equity and redistribution, you're going to have the inequality levels we're talking. So you've got to look at carefully how do you gain public trust in rebuilding some of the state institutions. Does it mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater? I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think that there has to be efficiency and making sure that these SOEs are fit for purpose and are working. So I think that PRASA, Transnet, the railroads, the roads, moving our people, we've got to have a strong, I'd say, and subsidized logistical network sector and hub, because you cannot have trucks at the level we have on the roads, the accidents that they cause, the negative externalities, the cost pressure they put on household costs. So everything we eat, if it's not coming from the ports, if it's not made in South Africa, it's moved by trucks into the main centers of our economy. And we're paying for that because of the high fuel costs and the inflationary pressures that have come in from the constrained supply because of the Europe and the Ukraine situation. So we've got to look at how do we improve these by reducing our input costs. And the only way to do it, and most countries have done it through subsidizing their state infrastructure and making it work, though. And that's the question and what we have to get right.
Doc, let me ask you this. Another competing reality when you're looking at our state-owned enterprises is you have households that are hoping, and these are the destitute, hoping that come March next year, that social distress grant continues or gets into a form of a basic income grant. All right, but that it needs money, it needs funding. Do you think we'll have a hint today that perhaps taxes need to go up for that? And what's your take?
I think the Minister of Finance, Minister Godongwana, has a really tight rope to play here. We've seen CIT favourable to big business earlier this year. We've seen VAT staying quite stable, and it's unlikely that he's going to be able to move that PAYE up because of the constrained households. Cost of living has exceeded our inflation. Cost of living has exceeded our increases in terms of wages, and most of us are seeing the cost of food much higher than the money that is coming into our bank accounts at the end of the day. So I think he's really constrained in terms of where to get more. We always see sin taxes going up, but net, it's not necessarily sufficient to have that budget balance. So I'm not expecting to see much movement in terms of PAY and VAT, in terms of collection, but we have seen some budget collection increase more than expected because of the windfalls from commodity prices, and that's been favorable to South Africa. And it's always good because we are mining rich country and we export a large portion of what we make. Unfortunately, we processed it. It would benefit us in terms of value chain and employment levels, but it does benefit the taxman in terms of windfalls.
Very quickly, do you think he'll say anything about the extension of grants? What's your take?
Well, that's been a discussion. I look at it from what he said at the beginning of the year. There's been a lot of pressure in terms of extension of the SRD relief. I've not seen positive gains. I look at the Presidential Advisory, Economic Advisory Council. They had a report that was released that didn't necessarily look favorably because of the fiscal implication and the cost of the SRD or the basic income grant. But I haven't heard anything definitive coming from the budget minister saying this is going to happen. They would have to finance this. They would have to have increased household income, which would mean that they collect more. They would have had businesses coming in with more corporate income tax, and it doesn't look like the budget balance is at a stage where they can take it from more sources. However, we will hear from the Minister of Finance himself shortly, and he'll be the one who will be able to tell us whether or not this will happen.
Dr. Ntabiseng Moleko, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. So we wait indeed. Come 2 o'clock, Minister Enoch Godongwana will shed some light on those issues. Favourable to some, not to others. But that budget taking place, or address taking place, Maseko, at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We'll be there live.